The Medieval Church, presented by CreativeEnglishTeacher.com. The church was the most powerful force in the medieval world. Medieval people did not feel that they were part of just England, France, or Italy. They were a member of Christendom, the united Christian world. The Roman Empire persecuted Christians for many years, but in 312 AD, Roman Emperor Constantine saw a cross of light appear in the heavens as he rode into battle. Above the cross was the phrase, "By this, win." Constantine drew the sign of the cross on the uniform of all his men and won the battle. After this, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. As the church grew, pagan fertility symbols like eggs, evergreen trees, and rabbits were incorporated into church holidays: Easter eggs, Christmas trees, and the Easter Bunny. Important dates like December 25th were also given new Christian importance. The Roman Empire fell into ruin, but the church and its offices remained intact, ruling the world in the stead of the empire that had created it. The church had an instructive analogy for how the world was organized. They taught that the world was like a body. The church, priests, bishops, etc., were the head and eyes. The nobles were the arms and hands. The commoners were the legs and feet. Because of this, the church claimed the right to rule society. The Pope was the head of the church, which he ruled from Rome. He was the most powerful man in the world, and kings obeyed his commands. The official language of the church was Latin, a holdover from the Roman Empire. The church performed many of the duties of modern government, trying civil and criminal court cases, caring for the sick, elderly, and poor, and providing education. Since the church was the government, it was organized like a government, with a hierarchy of ranks and titles such as bishop, archbishop, and cardinal. The church, which was supposed to be not of the world, became a very worldly power, and corruption grew. The church built massive cathedrals, which were supposed to inspire awe in the common people. Over the door of almost every cathedral were depictions of hell, demons, snakes, and man-eating fish. The church held the secrets of reading and writing. Only monks, writing primarily in Latin, recorded information in books. The wealthy could be taught to read and write at the local abbey or monastery. Common people had little to no access to the Bible. All copies were very expensive since they were handwritten. And since they were written in Latin, only the clergy or educated nobles could read the text anyway. The people relied on priests to tell them what the Bible said. The church taught that sins could only be forgiven if they were ritualistically confessed to a priest or other clergyman. People who died without a final confession of their sins were often considered to be bound for hell. The church preached against the 7 deadly sins: lust, gluttony, greed, wrath, sloth, envy, and pride. The church put a special emphasis on the Virgin Mary, the Madonna, the Mother of Christ. They taught that she acted as an intercessor between man and her Son, Jesus Christ. According to church teaching of the time, all those who were unbaptized went to hell. This included infants who had not yet been baptized. The Pope had the power of excommunication, or kicking people out of the church. Exclusion from the church meant a one-way ticket to hell. Another interesting bit of medieval church doctrine was the Harrowing of Hell. According to this, Jesus Christ descended into hell and rescued the heroes of the Old Testament from limbo, an area on the outskirts of hell for virtuous people who died without the knowledge of Christian salvation. They also taught about purgatory, an intermediary afterlife where souls who died under grace are purified of sin for their ascension into heaven. Once purified, souls can enter into heaven. Saints, men and women who had done great deeds in life and/or died for the cause of Christianity, were emphasized by the church. Particular saints protected a certain region or group of people. Saints could be prayed to for assistance in time of need. For example, according to one legend, Saint Christopher was a gigantic man who helped the young Jesus across a raging river. For this reason, he became the patron saint of travelers, who wore medallions engraved with his image to protect them. These medals are still popular today. St. Patrick was a missionary who first spread Christianity to Ireland. According to legend, he was able to drive all the snakes of Ireland into the ocean through the power of prayer. Saint Benedict felt that the church had grown too worldly, so he decided to remove himself from Rome and live away from society. His principles became the founding principles of a new order of holy men, the Benedictine Monks. The Benedictine order believed that monks should live a simple life free of possessions, doing hard physical labor on only a vegetarian diet. Prayer and thoughtful study were to be their main goals. Every part of a monk's life was about denying the body and feeding the soul. Monks took a solemn vow of chastity. Monks were to wear simple garments made from coarse cloth, not too comfortable. Some chose to give up the comfort of shoes. One abbot chose to wear underwear made from hair cloth, a scratchy, extremely uncomfortable material. Monasteries were often remote. Monks spent their days copying and illuminating or illustrating manuscripts. In addition to monasteries, there were also nunneries where nuns lived. Some monks and nuns were given to the church at birth by their parents. Others joined later in life when they had few other prospects. Young men who had no hope of ever owning property, and young women who had no hope of ever being married. Some felt called to the holy order by God. Churches with holy relics were popular tourist destinations. Relics were personal artifacts from a holy person. If a monastery or abbey had a particularly good relic, people would travel for miles to see it. Some of these relics included a piece of the burning bush, a splinter from the cross, a piece of bread chewed by Christ, the shroud laid over Christ in the tomb, drops of Christ's sweat, the swaddling clothes of Christ, and the crown of thorns. In medieval times, miracles were everyday occurrences. Saints returned from heaven to appear to commoners. Statues of saints bled real blood and even spoke. The sick were healed just by touching the holy relic of a saint. Some of these holy relics and the miracles associated with them were found to be frauds, though. In one church, it was discovered that a priest had constructed a crucifix that, when worked by the pedal at the bottom of the cross, would open its eyes and bob its head. As church corruption grew, the forgiveness of sins turned into a money business. If people paid enough, their sins would be forgiven. In fact, the very wealthy didn't even have to pray for their own forgiveness. They could hire a monk to do it for them. Jews were considered enemies of the church. There were vicious rumors that Jews kidnapped Christian children in order to drink their blood. The mentally ill were considered to be demon-possessed. Sometimes they were tortured or burned to drive the demons out of them. The common people believed in witches and warlocks, who gained their powers by mating with demons. Witches, it was said, could fly. They could cast spells to cause impotence in men, barrenness in women, and even sickness in cattle. They could also brew up storms in their cauldrons. The Bible barely mentions witchcraft, and all beliefs related to witches and warlocks came from folklore and superstition. It's a common misconception that the medieval church conducted widespread witch trials. This did not happen until after the Middle Ages. One medieval pope even banned the persecution of witches. It's important to realize that in the Middle Ages there were no church denominations as there are today. There was only one Catholic or universal church. To deviate from its teaching meant heresy, a crime punishable by death. Inquisition was the term used for the church's investigations into heresy. Suspects could be tortured until they confessed to their crimes. Some were hung up with weights on their legs until their joints dislocated. Their teeth or fingernails might be pulled out, their bones broken on a wedge, or their feet held over flame until they confessed. The church was not being true to what the Bible really teaches, and a few men and women were brave enough to challenge its power. A young man named Francis of Assisi renounced his rich lifestyle and devoted himself to God. He believed that holy men should all be penniless and homeless, wandering the countryside barefoot, earning their bread and board by doing menial labor and good deeds. He was disgusted by the corruption of the church, and his actions helped reform its practices. His followers became known as the Franciscan monks, who are identified by their brown habits. St. Francis once famously preached to the birds when his human audience stopped listening to him. He called the birds his little sisters and the beasts his little brothers. Despite the efforts of reformers, corruption in the church continued to increase all throughout the Middle Ages.